So in the last video, we finished opening this piece, and now we're going to get on to pulling, which is a really exciting time. So we made sure that we coned it, we hooked our fingers in, and now it's open and ready to pull a wall. Now, this is the coolest part of throwing, I think, because it's when you really get to see the pot come alive. So what we're going to start by doing is basically pinching the walls to throw our first wall. Now, normally, you won't be able to always reach with one hand, but in the beginning, you can pull your first wall with your first hand as high as the gap is between your fingers all the way up to the web in your hand. So as long as you can reach over the side there, you can squeeze and pull it up. So our goal is to take some of that clay at the bottom and push it in with our outside finger and push it out with our inside finger and then squeeze it and lift it upwards. Now as we move on, as I'm showing here, you can throw a number of different ways. You can use the tips of your finger, you can use your knuckle, you can use a sponge. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and pull the first wall with my left hand. And I'm going to support my hand. I always like to support both hands, whatever I do, to make it more stable. So I'm going to go ahead and just gently squeeze at the base of the piece. And as I'm squeezing, I'm going to go ahead and lubricate the surface of the piece a little bit. As I'm squeezing, I'm just gently going to lift up. So not a whole lot of squeezing and lifting, but just a little bit. So now you can see I've already started to make my piece into a little cylinder. Got about a 2.5-inch, 3-inch cylinder here. And a really important step that you have to do now every time you pull a wall is called compressing the lip. So what you do, it's just like centering in a way. You're going to squeeze with your outside fingers and press down with your inside finger, or your right hand. So what this does basically is keeps your rim nice and compressed, just like the bottom, because if the molecules get loose and the rim tears, it can spread through the rest of the piece and you can rip your piece off the wheel, and it's really frustrating. So now we're going to go into doing our first full pull. So like I said, you can use your knuckle, you can use your thumb, you can use your hands, you can reverse your hands. There's no right way to do this, but I'd recommend for a beginner that you use your sponge because it keeps the piece lubricated and prevents you from getting any chattering or any skipping or your hand grabbing. So my sponge hand is going to push inward while my top hand pushes outward, and my top hand is going to push outward and make a little belly stick out, and that's going to create a little shelf for me to grab onto with my sponge. So I'm going to try to do this open-handed. Normally I would do this with both hands connected, but what I'm going to do is push and lift. So that was just an example. So I'm going to go ahead with my right hand and push in, and my left hand is just guiding it, and I'm just going to gently lift up. And once again, I'm getting my big old hands in the way. And it doesn't seem like I did a lot, but if we look at it from the side, I mean, we've already lifted this up about another 1/2 inch to 1 inch. Now, as you can see, as you start going up your piece, you're definitely going to slow down the wheel. Now, I like to throw at high speed sometimes, but you're going to want to do something called collaring because the wheel's naturally going to want to stretch it out using centripetal force. So basically, you just take your hands, make sure they're wet, and collaring is basically choking in the piece, and you just press in and kind of lift up at the same time. And I recommend doing this because, like I said, the centripetal force is going to want to make your wheel go out naturally, or I'm sorry, your piece go out naturally. So if you even put it into more of a volcano shape, you will definitely have a better time when you go to pull the wall of lifting it up evenly, and it'll actually kind of stretch outwards, but by the time you get to the top, it'll actually stretch itself to being perfectly parallel straight up and down. So that's definitely a goal. So I'm going back through now, and you can see at the bottom there my little shelf that's sticking out, and I'm gripping underneath that shelf with the sponge, and I'm definitely getting a good pull on this one. We're going to get a lot of height out of this pull. So if I back up and look at it now, we got a good 2-3 inches off that pull. And I can go back through and collar it in again. I'm going to do that a little bit. Collar it in so we don't get the piece warping out. Remember, the higher it gets, the more it's going to want to go out on you. So definitely collaring is a good idea. And remember, I can press the rim again. And you really want to do this in maybe 2 to 3 pulls max. You don't really want to mess around with more than that because then your piece is going to get weak. I went ahead and used my finger and trimmed off the skirt there at the bottom and collared it in a little bit more. And just make sure your piece is vertical and it's looking pretty good. Now I stretch mine out a little bit, more of a Voss shape at this point, but I'm going to get back in there and go ahead and do another pull with my sponge. Grab my sponge. Notice when I put my hand in there, my hand's too big for the piece, but, and oh man, I just nicked it right there, so I got a little wobble in my piece now, but I can correct that in a little bit. But if you stick your piece down in there, the piece will just stretch around it, so don't be afraid to do that. I'm going to go ahead and do another pull. Just make sure you pull all the way through, and you can let off pressure a little bit when you get to the rim, because the rim will get thinner because there's less clay above it holding it in. So now I really made kind of a vase shape, so, or vase, however you want to say it. So an important thing now is using your rib. So what I'm going to do is, a lot of people think that you take a rib to smooth out the side and you push it into the piece, but you actually do not push it into the piece. You actually put the rib alongside the piece, and you push the piece into the rib. And as soon as you get to the end of the rib, you're going to stop and move it up. So see, I'm going to start here at the bottom. I'm going to push the piece into the rib. I'm going to move my hand upwards, following the rib. As soon as I reach the top, I'm going to go ahead and bring the rib up again and go ahead and finish smoothing out the rest of the cylinder. As you can see, I'm ending up with a little bit more of a vase shape here, and that's because I nicked my rim, and as it's spinning, the centripetal force pulled the rim out a little bit, but it's still pretty good as a cylinder. And you can see I've got kind of a wonk in the top of the lid there. So what I'm going to have to end up doing, I know I'm going to have to do this eventually, I'll do it a little bit, is trim it. And now I'm doing some mysterious action of the piece. Promise you it's nothing magic, probably just compressing the rim, making sure it's nice and strong. You can do that a couple times and you can shape the rim a little bit. And the next thing I'm going to do here is try to get that wobble. You can see how it's spinning there and it's just not even, so I'm going to use my pin tool and cut it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our pin tool, and we're not going to stick it straight in. We want to hold it at an extreme angle. We hold it straight in, ouch, ouch, no fun. So we want to just let it, and definitely don't angle it the other way because then it can catch the tool, but we just want to press it to the side and push it through slowly until it touches the tip of our finger and then lift off. So just push slowly and support with both hands. Try to do it without it so you can see. Push through until it taps your finger, and as soon as it does, lift off. And just like that, we got most of the wonk out of the piece. It's still not perfect, but it looks a lot better than it did. And that's the best way to get it off. Now I'm going to compress the rim again and shape it a little bit. And you can use your sponge to shape it. You can round it off. You can round it more on the inside. You can bevel it out. You can do all kinds of wonderful things. But for now, I think a nice flat rim is good. Now I'm going to use my modeling tool to scrape up some of the excess clay at the bottom and get that ready for removal, basically. Then I'm going to take the rib one last final time and go over the piece. Now, the metal rib is always good for finishing, for fine details. The wood rib is better for overall shaping and just getting the whole piece smoothed out, but this is better for getting the slip off the surface, getting it nice and smooth, and just really getting that final touch on it that you really like. So after I do that, I want to make sure that I get all the water out of the bottom. I'm going to take my sponge and drop it down on the inside. Be careful that you don't do what I just did and catch the rim with your finger. I have a bad habit of doing that with my big hands. Those of you small-handed people out there, throwing is good for you. So you can see I threw off my piece a little bit again. I have a bad habit of doing that. Like I always say, it's good to make sure that you are paying attention to what you're doing. And trust me, I'm the first person to take my own advice because I have taken beautiful, perfectly symmetrical, balanced pieces and made them look wobbly like this one. Now, this isn't a straight up and down cylinder anymore because through pulling it, it went a little bit off center, but it still's got a nice shape and I think it'll work for an example. So I'm going to go ahead and clean it up a little bit more. since I threw it off center a little bit. See if I can get some of that wonk back out of it. And that looks all right. I think that's about as good as I'm going to get. At some point, you have to realize that you can't push the piece any further. You're just going to end up doing more damage than good. See, I just don't want to give up. Just going to keep going a little bit more. And it is tempting. It is tempting to say, oh, I'll make it look a little nicer and a little bit nicer and a little bit nicer and a little up, and it's gone. And all of a sudden, you rip your piece off the wheel, you destroy the whole thing. But for the most part, it looks pretty good. And in the next video, we're going to be looking at how to go ahead and remove it from the wheel. That's a very important step as well. Pretty easy, so don't get too stressed. See you then.